This is the introductory lecture on Native American literature, which we touch on only briefly. We just don't have time to spend a lot of time here. But it is the first American literature. It is different from all other later literatures brought to us or created here in what, at this point in our study, would become the United States, because it is part of an oral tradition that was only written down later. Now, we find this in ancient Greece, in Homer and other epic poems. We find it in the oldest piece of literature we have in the world, so far as we know, which is the poem Gilgamesh from Sumeria. We have it in England, in Beowulf and others. And in America, before the Europeans arrived, there were many thriving societies. They did not think of themselves as a single nation the way we do. There were over 200 different linguistic groups in what would become the United States. And they basically had, each in their own language, names for themselves that most often translate as the people. These pieces that we will look at from the Native American oral tradition are both entertainment and instruction, like much literature. The first is a creation myth called The World on the Turtle's Back from the Iroquois of the Northeast United States. Then we have two poems, what we think of as poems. These would have been chants or songs, almost prayers. They would have come from ceremonies conducted by their native cultures when they were originally sung and composed. One called Song of the Skyloom and one called the Hunting Song, both from Plains or Southwestern Indians, the hunting song being from the Navajo in particular. And then you'll read a trickster tale from the Okanogan tribe of the Pacific Northwest. Trickster tales were common throughout the Native American culture, especially in what would become the United States, featuring the animal people coyote and raven or crow. The themes that we are choosing to focus on in Native American literature are two. The first, which we'll discuss here in this lecture, is the Native American view of the relationship between humanity and nature. Now, in Western culture, as dictated by classic Greece and Rome and by the Judeo-Christian tradition, so the Bible, sees man as the pinnacle of nature. In the Old Testament, any version that you encounter after creation, Adam and Eve are placed in the garden and God tells them to take dominion over the earth. They're responsible for it. They're supposed to take good care of it. That seems to be part of the general interpretation of most churches that use the Bible. But it is nevertheless a position of authority. That's not how the Native Americans saw it. Instead, they believed that humanity was a part of nature and that we had more trouble being worthy of the rest of the natural world, which fit its own place in the grand scheme of things by instinct. Almost like our thoughts, to some extent, our reason got in the way and led us astray from what we should naturally be doing. And they saw everything as spiritual. Now, this isn't a lowering of humankind. Humankind is still special. We are still spiritual. We still matter to whichever deities are in question. But the rest of the world was also seen as spiritual, as equally valuable. And so the relationship between man and nature is one of equals. And the focus was on the attempt of humanity to live in a way that allowed them to be in accord with nature. I want to do one last thing before I turn you loose on the reading for this session. You'll see throughout these lectures that I use this symbol, very, very simple symbol of a pendulum. Okay. To indicate, it is a generality, and like all generalities, if you look at very specific examples, it starts to break down. But to indicate a sliding scale of realism on one hand, okay, and what I'm going to call romanticism on the other. These each lend their name to specific periods in American literature and in other national literatures. The terms as I'm using them here have a lot in common with those, but we're not referring to the specific literary periods. Instead, we're referring to a general difference in approaches to the world. When I talk about being on the realistic end, I am talking about a society and writing that values logic, reason, empirical data, that is the measurable sense data, tends to favor the community over the individual, okay? In a very general sense. On this side, we're looking at imagination, inspiration rather than reason, or empirical data. You're going to have more of a focus on spirituality and realms of the spirit or of the gods in this section on this side. And there is going to be a greater focus on the individual rather than the community. With their very spiritual view of the entirety of nature and the natural world, and their emphasis on imagination, inspiration, and spirituality in their manner of looking at it, especially in this literature that we are reading, we'll see the Native American literature falls way over to this side. A slight caveat, I want to make sure that what I'm saying isn't taken to say that the Native American society was primitive. What it was different from the European society. They had complex societal organizations, values, religions, many of the things. There were differences in technology, obviously, and in many areas, technology favored the European settlers that would come. Many of the things over here, logic, reason, etc., were stronger and gave certain advantages. But we'll see as we look at these lectures that there were a lot of other things that happened besides supposed superiority of cultural values that led to the eventual dominance of European settlers on the continent.